They say a woman who builds with you in the trenches deserves to live in the palace. But what happens when the king forgets who handed him the crown? Amelia sold her jewelry to buy Charles his first suit. She starved so he could eat. But the moment Charles touched money, Amelia's sighs became his embarrassment. He broke her heart to please a mistress, but he forgot one thing: the tears of a faithful wife are a petition written directly to God. And when karma finally hit Charles, it didn't just break his legs, it broke his soul. This is the story of Amelia and Charles, a love that started in the trenches of Lagos mainland and ended in the cold silence of a rehabilitation center where regret became a living, breathing thing that refused to let go. Let me take you back to where it all began, because every ending has a beginning, and this one started with sacrifice. 5 years ago, Amelia was a woman of substance in every sense of the word. She was big, bold, and beautiful, with a heart that could swallow the ocean and still have room for more. She had the kind of curves that made her presence known when she entered a room, and she carried herself with the confidence of a woman who knew her worth. But more than her size or her beauty, Amelia had something rare in this world. She had loyalty that ran deeper than blood and faith that could move mountains. She lived with Charles in a cramped face-me-I-face-you apartment in Lagos mainland, the kind of place where privacy was a luxury, and your neighbor's business became your business whether you wanted it or not. The walls were thin, the ceiling leaked when it rained, and the bathroom was shared by 4 other families, but Amelia never complained because she believed in something bigger than their circumstances. She believed in Charles. Charles was a man with dreams that were bigger than his wallet. He had a university degree that was gathering dust and a pile of rejection letters that kept growing taller with each passing month. Every morning he would put on his one decent shirt, polish his worn-out shoes until they looked almost new, and head out to interviews that always ended the same way. "We'll get back to you." But they never did. On this particular evening, Charles came home with his shoulders slumped and his eyes red from frustration. He threw another rejection letter on the table, and it landed among the others like a dead leaf falling from a dying tree. "I'm tired, Amelia," Charles said, his voice cracking with defeat. "Look at this, another rejection. Maybe I'm cursed. Maybe we are destined to rot in this hole." Amelia walked over to him and placed her hands on his tense shoulders, kneading the knots that had formed from carrying so much disappointment. Her touch was gentle but firm, the kind of touch that said, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." "Stop that," Amelia said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that could melt ice. "You are not cursed, you are a king waiting for his throne. Here, take this." She reached into her wrapper and pulled out a wad of crumpled Naira notes, money that smelled like onions and pepper because she had kept it hidden in her market basket. She pressed it into his palm and closed his fingers around it. Charles looked at the money and then at her face, confusion mixing with guilt in his eyes. "Where did you get this?" "Amelia, this is your market capital. This is the money you use to buy provisions to sell. I can fry a kara without oil if I have to," Amelia said with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "But you cannot go to that interview tomorrow in a torn shirt. Go and buy a new one. I believe in you, Charles. I believe in you more than you believe in yourself." Charles pulled her into his arms and held her tight, and for a moment, everything felt like it would be okay. He didn't know that this woman, this beautiful, big-hearted woman, was skipping meals so he could eat 3 times a day. He didn't know that she had sold her mother's gold earrings, the only thing of value she owned, to pay for his professional certification course. He didn't know that she walked barefoot at home so she could save money to buy him new shoes for interviews. But she knew, and she did it anyway because that's what love looked like to Amelia. The breakthrough finally came 3 months later. Charles got a job at a top oil and gas firm in Victoria Island, the kind of job that came with a salary that had more zeros than they had ever seen. The kind of job that changed everything. At first, the change was beautiful. They moved out of the face-me-I-face-you and into a decent 2-bedroom flat in Serula. Amelia could finally cook in her own kitchen without waiting in line, and Charles could finally walk with his head held high because he was no longer a man waiting for his life to start. He was living it. But then something shifted. Money has a way of showing you who people really are, and for Charles, it showed him that he had been ashamed of Amelia all along. He had just been too broke to do anything about it. Hey my people, happy Christmas to you and yours. I hope this season is bringing you joy, peace, and all the blessings you deserve. If you're enjoying this story so far, do me a favor, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. Are you in Lagos, London, New York? I want to know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Join this storytelling family so you never miss an episode. Trust me, this story is about to get intense, and you don't want to be left behind. Now let's get back to Amelia and Charles, because the palace Charles was building was about to become a prison for the woman who helped him build it. 5 years after that first job, Charles was no longer the struggling man who lived in the trenches. He was now a senior manager at the firm, and with that title came a lavish duplex in Lekki, 2 luxury cars, and a lifestyle that screamed, "I've arrived." But somewhere between the promotions and the paychecks, Charles forgot the woman who had carried him when he couldn't carry himself. Money didn't just change Charles's bank account. It changed his eyesight. He no longer saw Amelia as the woman who sacrificed everything for him. He saw her as a woman who didn't fit into his new aesthetic, a woman whose size was an embarrassment to the image he was trying to build. On this particular Saturday evening, Charles was getting ready for his company's annual dinner, the kind of event where appearances mattered more than substance, and where your wife was an accessory that either elevated you or dragged you down. He stood in front of the mirror in their master bedroom, adjusting his custom-made tuxedo and checking his reflection from every angle. Amelia walked into the room wearing a beautiful red dress that hugged her curves in all the right places. She had spent weeks looking for the perfect outfit because she wanted to make Charles proud. She wanted to show him that she could fit into his new world, that she could be the woman standing beside him at those fancy events. She spun around with a smile that lit up the room. "Babe, how do I look?" Amelia asked, her voice filled with excitement. "I bought this just for your company dinner tonight." Charles turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was like a slap. His eyes traveled from her head to her toes, and every inch of that journey carried judgment. He scowled, his nose wrinkling like he had smelled something offensive. "Amelia, are you seriously wearing that?" Charles asked, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. The smile on Amelia's face began to fade like a flower wilting in the sun. "What's wrong with it?" "You look like a fire extinguisher wrapped in silk," Charles said, his words deliberate and cruel. "It's tight. It emphasizes everything I've been asking you to hide. Take it off." The words landed on Amelia like stones, each one heavier than the last. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach, and for the first time in years she felt small despite her size. "Charles, that hurts. I feel beautiful in this." "You feel beautiful?" Charles let out a bitter laugh that had no humor in it. "Well, you look embarrassing. My colleagues have wives who look like models. You look like you ate their wives. Wear that black tent thing, the loose one, or better yet, just stay home." The air in the room became thick with tension, and Amelia felt something break inside her chest, something that made a sound only her heart could hear. But she didn't cry, not yet, because crying would mean admitting that the man she loved had just destroyed her with his words. "I'll stay home," Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible. But even as she said it, something inside her refused to accept it. Some part of her still believed that Charles would remember who she was, that he would remember what they had built together. So when Charles left the house, Amelia changed into the black dress he had mentioned, the one that hid every curve and made her look like she was attending a funeral instead of a celebration. She showed up at the high-end restaurant in Victoria Island 30 minutes after Charles arrived, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. The restaurant was the kind of place where the waiters wore white gloves, and the menu had prices that could feed a family for a month. Amelia felt out of place the moment she walked in, but she pushed through, because love makes you do things that logic would never allow. She spotted Charles sitting at a large table with his colleagues, all of them dressed in expensive suits and designer dresses. And there, sitting right next to Charles, was a woman who looked like she had stepped out of a magazine cover. She was slim, elegant, and wearing a dress that probably cost more than Amelia's entire wardrobe. Her name was Nora, and the way she looked at Charles said everything Amelia needed to know. Amelia walked up to the table with a nervous smile, her hands trembling slightly. "Good evening, everyone. Hello, darling." The table went silent. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence, and all eyes turned to Amelia. Nora looked at Charles with a smirk that was equal parts amusement and cruelty. "Charles," Nora said, her voice dripping with false innocence, "is this the housekeeper you mentioned?" Time seemed to freeze. Charles looked at his boss, then at Nora, then at Amelia. His face went pale, and for a split second, Amelia saw something in his eyes that might have been regret. But then it was gone, replaced by something colder. Charles let out a nervous laugh that sounded like glass breaking. Yes, sort of, she helps with the kids." "Amelia, what are you doing here? I told you I didn't need anything from the house." The words hit Amelia like a physical blow. Her vision blurred, and she could feel tears welling up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall, not here, not in front of these people who were looking at her like she was something dirty that had wandered in from the street. "Housekeeper," Amelia's voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. "Charles, I am your wife, the mother of your children." Charles stood up so quickly that his chair scraped against the floor, creating a sound that made everyone at nearby tables turn to look. "Don't cause a scene," he hissed, his voice low but fierce. "You see, this is why I don't bring you out. You are too loud, too big, and too emotional. Get out, now." He pulled the car keys from his pocket and handed them to a passing waiter. "Take her to the valet, tell him to drive her home." And just like that, Charles sat back down and picked up his champagne glass like nothing had happened. He toasted with Nora while Amelia stood there, humiliated and heartbroken, with an entire restaurant of strangers watching her world crumble. The ride home was a blur of tears and pain. Amelia couldn't stop replaying the moment in her head, couldn't stop hearing Charles call her the housekeeper, couldn't stop seeing the way Nora had smiled like she had won some kind of prize. When she got home, she went straight to the children's room and watched them sleep. Precious, her 8-year-old daughter, had her father's nose. Junior, her 5-year-old son, had her smile. They were innocent and beautiful, and they deserved better than what was coming. Because deep down, Amelia knew that tonight was not the end. It was the beginning of something much worse, something that would test every ounce of strength she had left. And as she stood there in the darkness, watching her Barbies breathe softly in their sleep, she made a silent prayer to God. She didn't pray for Charles to change. She didn't pray for him to love her again. She prayed for the strength to survive whatever was coming next, because a woman's intuition is rarely wrong, and hers was screaming that the worst was yet to come. The night after the restaurant incident, Amelia didn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Charles slept peacefully beside her, his breathing steady and unbothered, as if he hadn't just shattered her heart in front of strangers and colleagues who would now forever see her as the help instead of the wife. The silence in the room was so loud it felt like screaming, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw Nora's smirk and heard Charles's words echoing in her mind like a curse that wouldn't break. When morning came, Charles woke up and got ready for work like nothing had happened. He showered, dressed in one of his expensive suits, sprayed cologne that cost more than Amelia used to make in a month selling provisions, and walked past her without a word. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement that he had torn her dignity to shreds and left it bleeding on a restaurant floor. Amelia wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to ask him when he had become this person who could look at her with such disgust. But she didn't, because somewhere deep inside, she was afraid of what he might say. She was afraid that he would confirm what his actions had already shown her, that he didn't love her anymore, that maybe he never really had. The days that followed were filled with a tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Charles started coming home later and later, always with excuses that sounded rehearsed and hollow. He would say he had meetings that ran overtime, clients that needed entertaining, projects that required his full attention. But Amelia knew better, because a woman always knows when her man is lying, even when she desperately wants to believe him. One evening, about 2 weeks after the restaurant incident, Amelia was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard Charles's phone vibrating on the dining table. He had left it there while he went upstairs to change, and the screen lit up with a message that made Amelia's blood run cold. The message was from someone saved as N in his contacts, and it read, "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby. Wear that cologne I like, the one that drives me crazy." Amelia's hands started trembling so badly that she had to grip the edge of the counter to steady herself. She wanted to look away, wanted to pretend she hadn't seen it, but her eyes were glued to the screen as more messages came flooding in, each one more intimate than the last. There were heart emojis, kissy faces, and references to nights spent together that Charles had told Amelia were spent at the office. When Charles came back downstairs, he found Amelia holding his phone with tears streaming down her face. For a moment, panic flashed across his features, but then it was replaced by something worse. Irritation, as if she was the one in the wrong for discovering his betrayal. "You're going through my phone now?" Charles asked, snatching it from her hands. "That's low, Amelia, even for you." "Even for me." Amelia's voice rose despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "Charles, who is N? Who is this woman calling you baby and talking about your cologne?" Charles let out an exasperated sigh and ran his hand over his face like she was exhausting him. "Her name is Nora, and she's a colleague. We work together. It's just friendly banter, Amelia. You're reading too much into it." Friendly banter? Amelia felt like she was losing her mind. "Charles, she's talking about nights you spent together, nights you told me you were working late." "Because I was working late," Charles shot back, his voice cold and defensive. "Nora and I sometimes work on projects together. That's all. You're being paranoid and insecure, and honestly, it's getting old. Maybe if you spent less time worrying about what I'm doing and more time taking care of yourself, we wouldn't be having this conversation." The words landed like acid on an open wound. Amelia felt her chest tighten, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Taking care of myself, what does that mean, Charles? Charles looked at her with an expression that was equal parts pity and disgust. It means losing weight, Amelia. It means going to the gym. It means looking like someone I'm proud to be seen with instead of someone I have to make excuses for. The silence that followed was deafening. Amelia stood there feeling like she had been slapped, and Charles stood there looking at her like she was a problem he no longer wanted to solve. Then he grabbed his car keys from the table and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Amelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Out," Charles said without turning around. "Don't wait up." The door slammed behind him, and Amelia was left standing in the kitchen with dinner burning on the stove and her world falling apart around her. She sank to the floor and let the tears come, the kind of tears that shook her entire body and made sounds she didn't know she could make. She cried for the man Charles used to be, the man who had held her tight and promised to love her forever. She cried for the sacrifices she had made, the jewelry she had sold, the meals she had skipped, the dreams she had put aside so he could chase his own. And most of all, she cried because she knew, deep in her bones, that things were about to get much worse. Charles didn't come home that night, or the night after that. He would leave for work in the morning and return in the early hours when Amelia and the children were asleep, and the distance between them grew wider with each passing day. The house that was supposed to be their palace had become a mausoleum, filled with memories of a love that was slowly dying. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon when the children were at a birthday party, Charles came home with a look on his face that Amelia had never seen before. It was determination mixed with cruelty, and it made her stomach drop. "We need to talk," Charles said, and those 4 words carried the weight of an ending. They sat in the living room, Charles on one couch and Amelia on another, the physical distance between them a perfect representation of the emotional chasm that had formed. Charles didn't waste time with pleasantries or gentle words. He went straight for the kill. "I want you out, Amelia," Charles said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Today." Amelia felt like the room was spinning. "Out to where, Charles? This is our house." "This is my house," Charles corrected her, emphasizing each word like he was explaining something simple to a child. "I paid for it. You just occupy space, too much space. Nora is moving in. She fits the lifestyle I have now. You belong in the past." The words were so cruel, so deliberate, that Amelia couldn't process them at first. She just stared at Charles, searching his face for any sign of the man she had married, the man she had starved for, the man she had believed in when no one else did. But that man was gone, replaced by this stranger who spoke about her like she was trash that needed to be taken out. "Charles, please," Amelia begged, and she hated herself for begging, but she couldn't help it. "Think about the children. Think about Precious and Junior. They need their father. They need us to be together." "The children will be fine," Charles said dismissively. "They'll visit me on weekends, but you and I are done, Amelia. I'm done pretending. I'm done being embarrassed. I'm done carrying the weight of your failures." "My failures?" Amelia's voice broke. "Charles, I carried you when you had nothing. I fed you when you were hungry. I clothed you when you were naked. Everything you have, everything you've become, I helped build that. And now you're calling me a failure." Charles stood up and walked to the door, opening it wide so the evening air rushed in. "I've already packed your things. They're in the garage. Take them and go. If you're not out in the next hour, I'll call security to remove you." Amelia couldn't believe what she was hearing. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. But then Charles went upstairs and came back down carrying 2 large suitcases, and the reality of the situation hit her like a freight train. He dragged the suitcases outside and dumped them on the driveway, not caring that it had started to rain and her clothes were getting soaked. Amelia ran after him, slipping on the wet pavement in her desperation. "Charles, stop. Please just stop and think about what you're doing." But Charles didn't stop. He went back inside and emerged with more bags, more of her belongings, more pieces of the life they had built together. The children's nanny, Grace, stood at the door with her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face as she watched the scene unfold. Even she couldn't believe what was happening. When Charles brought out the last bag, Amelia fell to her knees in the mud, her dress soaking through, her hair plastered to her face by the rain. She looked up at Charles with eyes that held 15 years of love, sacrifice, and devotion. "Charles, remember who fed you," Amelia said, her voice shaking but strong. "Remember who clothed you. Remember who believed in you when the whole world said you were nothing. God is watching. You mock me for my weight, but this weight carried you when you were light as a feather from hunger. You hear me? This body you're ashamed of is the same body that held you when you cried about your failures. Don't do this, Charles. Don't let the enemy use you to destroy what God put together." For a brief moment, something flickered across Charles's face. It might have been guilt, or maybe it was just a shadow from the porch light. But then it was gone, and his expression hardened back into cold indifference. "Go and lose weight," Charles said, his voice cutting through the rain. "Then maybe I'll send you child support." He walked back into the house and slammed the door so hard that the sound echoed through the entire neighborhood. Amelia heard the lock click, and that small sound felt like the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. She knelt there in the mud and rain, surrounded by suitcases that held the remnants of her life, and she realized that the man she loved was truly gone. Grace, unable to watch anymore, defied Charles's orders and ran outside with an umbrella. She helped Amelia to her feet and called a taxi because Charles had taken both cars and left her with nothing. As they waited for the taxi, Grace held Amelia close and whispered prayers over her, asking God to give her strength for what was coming. "Madam, where will you go?" Grace asked, her voice thick with emotion. Amelia didn't have an answer because she truly didn't know. Her parents were dead. Her siblings had their own struggles and families to feed. She had poured everything into Charles and their marriage, and now she had nothing left but wet clothes, broken dreams, and 2 children who would soon come home to find their mother gone. When the taxi arrived, Amelia loaded her suitcases into the trunk with shaking hands. She turned back to look at the house one last time, the house that was supposed to be her palace, the house she had dreamed about when they lived in that cramped face me I face you apartment. Light glowed from the living room window, and through the curtains she could see Charles's silhouette. He was on the phone, probably calling Nora to tell her the coast was clear. As the taxi pulled away, Amelia whispered a prayer that came from the deepest part of her soul. "God, I don't ask you to punish him, I ask you to teach him. Show him what he's lost. Show him what he threw away. And when he finally understands, when the lessons have been learned and the tears have been cried, let him remember this moment. Let him remember the woman who loved him when he had nothing and the woman he destroyed when he had everything." The taxi driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror with concern in his eyes. "Madam, where to?" Amelia gave him the address of a small guest house in Yaba, a place that charged by the night and asked no questions. It was all she could afford with the little money she had managed to save in a secret account Charles didn't know about. As the city lights blurred past her window, Amelia made herself a promise. She would not let this break her. She would not let Charles's cruelty define her worth. She would rise again, not for him, but for herself and for her children. And one day, when he realized what he had done, when karma came knocking on his door with the bill for his sins, she would be so far gone that his regrets wouldn't be able to reach her. But that day felt impossibly far away, and for now, all Amelia could do was survive the night and wake up to face whatever tomorrow would bring. The guest house in Yaba smelled like old carpet and desperation, and the single bed creaked every time Amelia shifted her weight. She lay there that first night staring at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the sounds of Lagos nightlife filtering through the thin walls. Music from a nearby bar, the shouts of late-night hawkers, the occasional siren wailing in the distance. These were the sounds of survival, and Amelia was now part of that chorus whether she wanted to be or not. She had cried so much in the taxi that she thought she had no tears left, but they kept coming anyway, silent and hot, soaking the pillow that smelled like too much bleach and broken dreams. She kept replaying the scene over and over in her mind, seeing Charles's face as he threw her belongings into the rain, hearing his voice as he told her to lose weight, feeling the cold mud seeping through her dress as she knelt and begged a man who had already made up his mind. But somewhere around 3 in the morning, when exhaustion finally started to pull her under, something shifted inside Amelia. It was small at first, just a tiny spark of anger that flickered in the darkness of her grief, and that anger whispered something her sadness had been trying to drown out. "You are not done. This is not your ending." When morning came, Amelia woke up with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. Her eyes were swollen and her body ached from sleeping on the hard mattress, but her mind was sharp and focused. She sat up and looked around the tiny room that was now her entire world, and instead of seeing failure, she saw possibility. Instead of seeing rock bottom, she saw solid ground to build on. The first thing she did was call her friend Jennifer, the only person she had managed to stay close to despite Charles's subtle attempts to isolate her from her old life. Jennifer picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice heavy with sleep. "Amelia, girl, it's 7 in the morning, what's wrong?" "Everything," Amelia said, and then she told Jennifer the whole story, from the restaurant humiliation to the eviction in the rain. She didn't cry as she spoke because she had made a decision during the night that tears were a luxury she could no longer afford. Tears were for mourning, and she wasn't dead yet. Jennifer listened without interrupting, and when Amelia finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Jennifer spoke, and her voice was filled with a fury that made Amelia feel less alone. "That man is a fool," Jennifer said, her words sharp and certain. "A blind, ungrateful fool. But Amelia, listen to me. You are going to rise from this. You hear me? You are going to rise so high that when Charles finally pulls his head out of that woman's behind and realizes what he's lost, you'll be so far above him that he'll need a telescope just to see your shadow. Those words became Amelia's anthem for the weeks that followed. She spent 3 days in that guest house, 3 days of planning and strategizing, and remembering who she was before Charles made her forget. She thought about her mother, who had raised 5 children alone after her father passed away, selling food by the roadside and never once complaining about her lot in life. She thought about her grandmother, who had built a successful tailoring business with nothing but a hand-me-down sewing machine and determination that could bend steel. Strength ran in Amelia's blood. She had just forgotten it for a while, too busy trying to shrink herself to fit into Charles's shrinking capacity to love her. On the 4th day, Amelia used the last of her savings to rent a single room in a Face Me I Face You apartment in Bariga, and the irony wasn't lost on her. She was back where she and Charles had started, back in the trenches, except this time she was alone and she had 2 children who would be coming to visit her in a place that was a far cry from the Lekki duplex they had grown accustomed to. Grace, the nanny, had been keeping Precious and Junior at the house, telling them that their mother had gone to visit a sick relative. But Amelia knew she couldn't hide from her children forever, and the thought of explaining their new reality to them made her chest tight with anxiety. When Grace brought the children to visit that first Saturday, Amelia had cleaned the room until it sparkled and decorated it with colourful fabrics to make it feel less like a cell and more like a home. She had bought their favourite snacks with money she couldn't really spare, and she had practiced her smile in the cracked mirror until it looked almost genuine. Precious walked in first, her 8-year-old eyes taking in everything with a wisdom that children shouldn't have to carry. Junior bounced in behind her, his 5-year-old energy filling the small space like sunlight. "Mommy," Junior launched himself at Amelia, wrapping his small arms around her waist. "I missed you so much. Are you done visiting the sick people? Can you come home now?" Amelia knelt down so she could look both her children in the eyes, and she felt her practiced smile start to crack at the edges. "Baby, Mommy isn't coming back to that house. But that's okay because we're going to make this place our special spot. It's going to be our adventure." Precious, too smart for her own good, crossed her arms and looked at her mother with eyes that saw too much. "Daddy said you left because you wanted space, but Grace told me what really happened. She told me Daddy threw you out." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Amelia felt anger rise in her throat, not at Precious but at Charles for putting her in this position, for forcing her to explain adult cruelty to a child who still believed in fairy tales. "Your daddy and I are having some grown-up problems," Amelia said carefully, choosing each word like she was walking through a minefield. "But that has nothing to do with how much we both love you. You understand. I understand that Daddy has a new friend named Nora who's always at the house now," Precious said, her voice taking on an edge that made her sound older than her years. "And I understand that she sleeps in your room and sits in your chair and acts like she's our new mommy. But she's not. She'll never be." Amelia pulled both children close and held them tight, feeling Junior's heartbeat against her chest and Precious's tears soaking into her shoulder. In that moment, she made a vow that went deeper than any wedding vow she had ever spoken. She would not let Charles's betrayal poison her children. She would not let them grow up thinking that love meant accepting cruelty, or that marriage meant losing yourself. After Grace took the children back to Lekki, Amelia sat alone in her room and did something she hadn't done in years. She pulled out a notebook and started writing down ideas, plans, dreams that she had buried when she married Charles because supporting his dreams had become her only dream. Before Charles, Amelia had been known throughout her neighborhood for her cooking. People used to beg her to cater their events because her jollof rice had a magic in it that made people close their eyes and hum with pleasure, and her pepper soup could cure heartbreak and hangovers with equal efficiency. She had dreamed of opening a restaurant one day, but Charles had laughed at the idea and told her that wives of successful men didn't need to work, that her job was to look good and raise the children. But Charles wasn't here anymore, and his opinions no longer had the power to cage her dreams. Amelia started small. She used the little money she had left to buy ingredients, and she cooked huge pots of food that she packed into takeaway containers. Every morning at 5, she would wake up and position herself outside office buildings in Yaba and Surula, selling breakfast to workers who were too rushed or too tired to cook for themselves. The work was hard and the hours were long, and some days she would come home with her feet swollen and her back aching, wondering if she had made a mistake, wondering if she should have just begged Charles to take her back. But then she would count the money she had made that day, money that was hers and hers alone, earned by her own hands and her own hustle, and the doubt would fade. Word spread quickly about the woman in Yaba who sold food that tasted like home. Her customer base grew from a handful of people to dozens, and then from dozens to hundreds. She saved every naira she could, cutting costs wherever possible, eating only once a day so she could put money aside for her children and for the future she was building. 3 months after Charles threw her out, Amelia got a call from a woman named Mrs. Peterson, who ran a corporate catering company. One of Mrs. Peterson's regular customers had tasted Amelia's food and insisted that Mrs. Peterson meet her. They met at a small cafe in Ikja, and Mrs. Peterson was a no-nonsense businesswoman in her 50s who wore her success like armor. She got straight to the point. "I tried your pepper soup," Mrs. Peterson said, stirring sugar into her tea. "And I'm going to be honest with you, Amelia. In my 30 years of eating Nigerian food, I have never tasted anything that good. What's your secret?" Amelia smiled, a real smile this time, not the practiced one she had been forcing for months. "Pain," she said simply. "I cook with pain and somehow it comes out tasting like love." Mrs. Peterson studied her for a long moment, and Amelia could see the older woman's mind working, calculating, assessing. "I have a proposal for you. I supply lunch to 6 major companies in Lagos, including 3 oil and gas firms. My current cook is retiring next month. I want you to replace her. You'll work from a commercial kitchen, you'll have a proper contract, and you'll earn more in a month than you're probably making in 6 months on the street." Amelia felt her heart start to race, but she forced herself to stay calm. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Mrs. Peterson said. "Just a requirement. You'll need to be able to handle large volumes, you'll need to maintain consistency, and you'll need to show up every day no matter what. Can you do that?" "Yes," Amelia said without hesitation. "I can do that." And she did. For the next 3 months, Amelia worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. She woke up at 4 in the morning and didn't get home until 9 at night. She cooked food for hundreds of people every day, and she did it with the same care and attention she gave to the meals she made for her children. Her hands developed burns and cuts that never fully healed, and her body ached in ways she didn't know were possible, but she never complained and she never missed a day. The money started coming in, real money, the kind of money that allowed her to move out of the face me I face you and into a decent 2-bedroom apartment in Gbagada. It wasn't lecky, but it was clean and safe, and most importantly, it was hers. She furnished it slowly, buying one piece at a time, and every item she purchased felt like a small victory against the man who had said she was nothing without him. She started going to the gym, not because Charles had told her to lose weight, but because she wanted to feel strong again. She wanted to look in the mirror and see a warrior instead of a victim. The weight came off slowly, and Amelia realized something profound as her body changed. She had never been too big. She had just been with a man who was too small to appreciate her. 6 months after the eviction, Amelia was a different woman. She still had her curves because she refused to starve herself for anyone's approval, but she was toned and healthy, and glowing with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you survived hell and came out stronger. She had money in the bank, her children visited her every weekend in an apartment she was proud of, and she had a career that was growing faster than she could have imagined. But she still thought about Charles sometimes, usually late at night when the apartment was quiet, and loneliness crept in like an unwanted guest. She wondered if he ever thought about her, if he ever regretted what he had done, if Nora was everything he thought she would be. She got her answer one evening, when Jennifer called with news that made Amelia's blood run cold. "Girl, you need to sit down for this," Jennifer said, her voice tight with barely contained fury. "What happened?" Amelia asked, already feeling dread pool in her stomach. "Charles and Nora were in an accident, a bad one. It happened on 3rd Mainland Bridge last night." Amelia's hand went to her mouth, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Despite everything, despite all the pain and humiliation, some part of her still cared about the man Charles used to be, the man she had loved before money changed him into someone unrecognizable. "Are they?" Amelia couldn't finish the sentence. "Nora's fine, minor injuries, but Charles..." Jennifer paused and Amelia could hear her take a deep breath. "Charles is in the hospital. His injuries are serious, Amelia, really serious. They're saying he might not walk again." The words hit Amelia like a physical blow, and she sank onto her couch as her legs gave out. She thought about the prayer she had whispered in the taxi that night, the prayer asking God to teach Charles a lesson. And now here it was, the lesson delivered in the form of crushed metal and shattered bones. "There's more," Jennifer continued, her voice softening. "Nora left him. The moment she found out how bad his injuries were and how much the medical bills would cost, she packed her things and disappeared. Charles is alone in that hospital, Amelia, completely alone." Amelia sat there in the growing darkness of her living room, feeling emotions she couldn't name swirl through her chest. Part of her wanted to feel satisfaction, wanted to feel like justice had finally been served. But mostly she just felt sad, sad for the man who had everything and threw it all away for a woman who couldn't even stay through his worst moment. "What are you going to do?" Jennifer asked quietly. Amelia looked around her apartment, at the life she had built from nothing, at the strength she had found in the darkest moment of her life. And she realized that she already knew the answer. "I'm going to visit him," Amelia said, her voice steady and sure. "Not because I want him back, not because I forgive him, but because my children deserve to see their father and because some part of me needs to close this chapter properly." "Are you sure?" Jennifer asked, concern evident in her voice. "I'm sure," Amelia said, "but Jennifer, I'm not going alone." 3 days later, Amelia walked into the hospital with her head held high and her heart protected by boundaries she had learned to build. And what she found there would change everything one final time. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and regret, and Amelia could feel her heart pounding against her ribs as she walked down the long corridor toward Charles's room. She had dressed carefully that morning, choosing a fitted emerald green dress that hugged her curves in all the right places and made her skin glow like she had been kissed by the sun. Her hair was styled in elegant braids that cascaded down her back, and she wore just enough makeup to highlight her features without hiding the natural beauty that had always been there, waiting for her to see it. She wasn't dressed for Charles. She was dressed for herself, as a reminder of how far she had come and how much she had grown. But she'd be lying if she said a small part of her didn't want him to see what he had thrown away. Jennifer walked beside her, having insisted on coming for moral support, and as they approached room 214, Amelia felt her steps slow. She paused outside the door, her hand hovering over the handle, and took a deep breath that did nothing to calm the storm brewing inside her chest. "You don't have to do this," Jennifer whispered, placing a gentle hand on Amelia's shoulder. "We can turn around right now and walk away. He doesn't deserve even a minute of your time." "I know," Amelia said softly, "but I need to do this. Not for him, but for me. I need to see him to prove to myself that I'm really free from the hold he had over me." Jennifer nodded and gave her shoulder a supportive squeeze. "I'll wait right here. If you need me, just call." Amelia pushed open the door and stepped inside, and what she saw made her breath catch in her throat despite all her mental preparation. Charles lay in the hospital bed looking like a shadow of the man who had thrown her out into the rain. His face was gaunt and pale. His eyes were sunken with dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights and pain that went deeper than physical injuries, and his legs were elevated in traction, bound by metal rods and bandages that looked like instruments of torture. But what struck Amelia most was the look in his eyes when he saw her. It wasn't the cold indifference she had seen that night in the rain, or the disgust she had seen at the restaurant. It was something raw and desperate and broken, something that looked like a man drowning and seeing a lifeboat just out of reach. "Amelia," Charles whispered, his voice hoarse and cracking. "You came, I didn't think. I didn't dare hope that you would come." Amelia walked further into the room, her heels clicking against the tile floor with a confidence she had to remind herself she actually possessed. She stopped at the foot of his bed, maintaining a safe distance, and looked at him with eyes that held neither anger nor pity, just a quiet sadness for what they had both lost. "Jennifer told me what happened," Amelia said, her voice steady and controlled. "How are you feeling?" Charles let out a bitter laugh that turned into a cough, and when he finally caught his breath, his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "How am I feeling? I can't feel my legs, Amelia. The doctors say I might walk again with extensive therapy and surgery, but they also say I might not. I might spend the rest of my life in a wheelchair, dependent on other people for everything." "I'm sorry to hear that," Amelia said, and she meant it because despite everything, she wasn't a cruel person and she didn't take pleasure in seeing anyone suffer, not even the man who had destroyed her. "Are you?" Charles asked, his voice taking on an edge. "Are you really sorry? Because I wouldn't blame you if you came here to gloat, to tell me that this is what I deserve for what I did to you. God knows I've been telling myself the same thing every day since I woke up in this bed." Amelia pulled up a chair and sat down, crossing her legs with a grace that came from finally being comfortable in her own skin. "I didn't come here to gloat, Charles. I came because the children have been asking about you, and I wanted to see if you were well enough for them to visit." And the mention of the children broke something in Charles, and tears started streaming down his face, the kind of tears that come from a deep well of regret that has been building for months. "The children," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "God, Amelia, I've messed up everything. I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me for a woman who couldn't even stay long enough to see if I would survive the night." "Nora left," Amelia said, and it wasn't a question because she already knew the answer. The moment she found out how bad my injuries were and saw the medical bills piling up, Charles confirmed, wiping at his face with shaking hands. She took the jewelry I bought her, the designer bags, everything of value she could carry, and she disappeared like smoke. I called her phone 100 times, and she finally answered once just to tell me that she didn't sign up to be a nurse and that I should have been more careful on the road. The irony wasn't lost on Amelia. Charles had left her because she didn't fit his image, and now Nora had left him because he no longer fit hers. Karma really did have a sense of humor, even if it was dark and twisted. "I need to tell you something," Charles said, his voice urgent now, as if he was afraid Amelia would leave before he could get the words out. That night, the night of the accident, Nora and I were fighting about money. She wanted 5 million naira for some business venture, and I had just given her 3 million the week before. I told her no, and she started screaming that if I couldn't afford her, she would find a real man who could. Charles paused, his jaw clenching with the memory. I got so angry that I turned to look at her while I was driving, and that's when the truck came out of nowhere. The car flipped 3 times, and all I could think about in those few seconds was you. Not Nora, not my career, not the house or the cars or anything else. Just you. I thought about the night I threw you out in the rain, and I realized that I had destroyed the only person who ever truly loved me. Amelia felt her throat tighten, but she didn't let the tears fall because she had cried enough tears for this man to fill an ocean, and she was done drowning in them. "Charles, why are you telling me this?" "Because I need you to know that I'm sorry," Charles said, reaching out his hand toward her, his fingers trembling with desperation. "I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry for everything I did to you. I was a fool, Amelia. I let money and status and the opinions of people who don't even matter turn me into someone I don't recognize. I mocked you for your size when your size was never the problem. The problem was me. The problem was my shallow, empty soul that couldn't see the treasure I had right in front of me." Charles, Amelia started, but he cut her off, his words coming faster now, tumbling out like water from a broken dam. "Please, Amelia, just listen. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve a second chance. But I'm begging you, please take me back, help me through this. We can start over. I'll be a better man this time, I swear it. I'll worship the ground you walk on. I'll spend every day for the rest of my life making up for what I did to you. Just please don't leave me alone in this darkness." His hand was still stretched out toward her, shaking with the effort of holding it up, and Amelia looked at it for a long moment. She thought about the woman she used to be, the woman who would have taken that hand without hesitation, who would have forgiven him immediately and rushed to his side to nurse him back to health, because that's what love was supposed to do. But she wasn't that woman anymore. That woman had been reborn in the mud and rain outside a house that was never really hers, and she had risen from those ashes with wings that Charles's apologies couldn't clip. "I forgave you a long time ago, Charles," Amelia said quietly, and she saw hope flash across his face like lightning. "Not for you, but for me. I forgave you because carrying anger and bitterness was like drinking poison and expecting you to get sick. I forgave you because I needed to move forward with my life, and I couldn't do that while holding on to the pain you caused me." "So you'll take me back?" Charles asked, his voice breaking with relief. "We can be a family again." "No, Charles," Amelia said, and those 2 words seemed to suck all the air out of the room. "Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean pretending that what you did to me didn't happen or that we can just go back to the way things were. You can't go back to something that was broken from the start." Charles's face crumpled, and the hope that had been building in his eyes died like a candle in the wind. "Amelia, please, I have nothing left. The company let me go because I can't work. The house is being foreclosed because Nora spent everything. My brother Felix is the only family member still talking to me, and he can barely afford to keep the lights on in his own apartment. I have no one, Amelia. You're all I have left." "And whose fault is that?" Amelia asked, her voice still gentle but firm. "Charles, you had everything. You had a wife who loved you unconditionally, children who adored you, a home filled with warmth and laughter. But you threw it all away because you were embarrassed by the woman who carried you through your darkest days. You chose a lifestyle over a life, and now you're facing the consequences of that choice." "I know," Charles whispered, tears flowing freely now. "God, I know, and I would do anything to take it back. But I can't, Amelia. All I can do is beg you for another chance, hope that somewhere in your heart you still love me enough to help me through this." Amelia stood up, smoothing down her dress, and she felt the weight of 15 years of marriage and betrayal and growth settle on her shoulders. "I will pay for your surgery, Charles." His eyes widened with shock and gratitude. "You will, Amelia, thank you so much, I knew you still." "Let me finish," Amelia interrupted, her voice taking on a strength that made Charles fall silent. "I will pay for your surgery because you are the father of my children, and they love you despite everything. They deserve to have a father who can heal and maybe walk again. But this money comes with conditions. You will go to therapy, not just physical therapy but mental therapy too, because you need to deal with whatever made you think it was okay to treat people the way you treated me. You will be a present father to Precious and Junior, and you will never, ever speak to them about me in a negative way. And you will accept that you and I are over, truly and permanently over. But Amelia, Charles tried to protest, but she held up her hand. I'm not finished. The woman you destroyed no longer exists, Charles. She died in the rain that night and someone new was born in her place. Someone stronger. Someone who knows her worth. Someone who refuses to settle for a man who only wants her back because his better option didn't work out. There was a knock on the door and Jennifer poked her head in. Amelia, there's someone here who wants to say hello. Amelia nodded, and the door opened wider to reveal a tall, broad-shouldered man in a white doctor's coat. He had warm brown eyes, a smile that could light up a room, and the kind of presence that commanded respect without demanding it. He walked into the room with the confidence of a man who was comfortable in his own skin, and when he looked at Amelia, his entire face softened with an affection so pure and genuine that it was almost tangible. Sorry to interrupt, the man said, his voice deep and soothing. I just finished my rounds and thought I'd check in. Amelia told me she was visiting her ex-husband. Charles stared at the man, then at Amelia, and understanding slowly dawned on his face like a sunrise he didn't want to see. Who is? Amelia turned to the man and smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and made her whole face glow. The man walked over and placed a protective hand on the small of her back, a gesture so natural and comfortable that it spoke of intimacy and care. Charles, this is Dr. David Okonkwo, Amelia said, her voice filled with a warmth that Charles hadn't heard directed at him in years. He's a neurosurgeon here at the hospital, and he's also my fiancé. The word fiancé hit Charles like a physical blow, and he felt his chest constrict with a pain that was worse than any of his physical injuries. He looked at David, really looked at him, and saw everything he used to be and everything he had lost. David was successful, handsome, confident, and most importantly, he looked at Amelia like she was the most precious thing in the world. David extended his hand to Charles with a kindness that felt almost cruel in its genuineness. It's good to meet you, Charles. Amelia has told me everything about your history together. I want you to know that I'll take care of her and the children like the treasures they are. She's safe with me. They all are. Charles couldn't take David's hand. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at this man who had everything Charles had thrown away. David was looking at Amelia with the same adoration Charles used to feel before money poisoned his heart, and the realization of what he had lost hit him harder than the truck on 3rd Mainland Bridge. How long, Charles finally managed to croak out. How long have you two been together? We met 4 months ago, Amelia said, her hand finding David's and intertwining their fingers. I was catering a medical conference and David told me my jollof rice reminded him of his late mother's cooking. We started talking and he asked me out for coffee. He never once asked me to change. He never once looked at me with anything but respect and admiration. He loves my curves, Charles. He loves my laugh. He loves my heart. He doesn't ask me to shrink or hide or be anything other than exactly who I am. David pulled Amelia closer and pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, and that simple gesture of affection was more devastating to Charles than any words could have been. When you find a queen, David said, looking at Charles with something that might have been pity, you don't ask her to become less. You build her a throne. The silence that followed was heavy with everything Charles wanted to say but couldn't. All the apologies and regrets and desperate pleas that wouldn't change anything, because some doors, once closed, become walls. Get well soon, Charles, Amelia said, her voice gentle but final. I'll arrange for the surgery payments and the children will visit next weekend, but this is goodbye for us. Really and truly goodbye. She turned to leave, her hand still in David's, and Charles watched them walk toward the door with a desperation that made his heart feel like it was being crushed in a vice. Amelia, wait, Charles called out, his voice breaking with agony. Please, just wait. But they didn't stop. They walked out of the room together, and through the open door, Charles could hear them laughing about something, a private joke that he would never be part of, a happiness that he had no claim to. Charles sat there in his hospital bed staring at the empty doorway, feeling the full weight of his choices pressing down on him like a mountain. He had everything once, a woman who loved him with her whole heart, children who looked at him like he hung the moon, a home filled with warmth and second chances. And he had thrown it all away for a woman who couldn't even stay through one hospital visit, for an image that crumbled the moment life got hard, for a pride that left him alone and broken in a sterile room that smelled like his own regrets. He reached for his phone with trembling hands, wanting to call someone, anyone who could make this pain stop. But his contacts list was a graveyard of relationships he had destroyed and bridges he had burned. His finger hovered over Amelia's name, the only number that mattered, but he knew calling her would be pointless because she had already said goodbye, and this time she meant it. Charles's chest started to tighten, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. The regret was literally suffocating him, wrapping around his lungs like vines and squeezing until he couldn't get enough air. He gasped, clutching at his chest, and the heart monitor beside his bed started beeping frantically. A nurse rushed in, her eyes widening with alarm. "Mr. Charles, you need to calm down. Your heart rate is spiking. Try to breathe slowly." But Charles couldn't calm down because he had just watched the love of his life walk away with another man. A better man. A man who had the wisdom to see treasure where Charles had only seen flaws. He wanted to call after her, to beg her one more time, to tell her that he would do anything if she would just come back. But she was already gone, and Charles was left alone with the darkness he had created, and the future he had destroyed with his own 2 hands. The nurse managed to stabilize Charles after 20 minutes of panic and medication, but she couldn't stabilize the storm raging inside his soul. He lay in that hospital bed for 3 days after Amelia's visit, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of their conversation, every word she had spoken, every look she had given him that said he was nothing more than a chapter she had closed and moved past. The surgery that Amelia paid for was scheduled for the following week, and true to her word, she had covered every expense without hesitation or complaint. The hospital administrator had come to Charles's room with paperwork showing that an anonymous donor had paid nearly 15 million naira for his medical care. And Charles knew exactly who that donor was because only one person in the world still cared enough about him to save his life, even after he had tried to destroy hers. Felix, Charles's younger brother, visited him every day, bringing food that Charles barely touched and conversation that Charles barely heard. Felix had always been the good one, the one who worked a modest job as a teacher, and lived a simple life with his wife and 3 children in a small apartment in Ikja. He had never chased money or status, and he had warned Charles years ago that pride and wealth were a dangerous combination that could corrupt even the strongest man. "You look like death," Felix said one afternoon, pulling up a chair beside Charles's bed. "And not the peaceful kind, the kind that haunts you." "I feel worse than I look," Charles muttered, his voice hollow and empty. "Felix, I've lost everything, everything that mattered, everything that was real. And the worst part is that I did it to myself. I can't even blame anyone else." Felix leaned back in his chair and studied his brother with eyes that held both sympathy and disappointment. "You know what Mama used to say? She said that God gives us blessings to see what we'll do with them, and when we abuse those blessings, He takes them away and gives them to someone who will appreciate them. You had Amelia, Charles. You had a woman who would have walked through fire for you, and you traded her for a woman who couldn't even walk through a hospital corridor." "I know," Charles whispered, his voice cracking. "Trust me, I know. I see it every time I close my eyes. I see her face when I called her the housekeeper. I see her kneeling in the rain begging me not to throw her out. I see her walking away with that doctor, and Felix, the way he looked at her, the way she smiled at him, it killed me. It actually killed something inside me." "Maybe that's what needed to happen," Felix said gently. "Maybe the part of you that died was the part that needed to go so something better could grow in its place." Charles turned to look at his brother, tears streaming down his face. "What if there's nothing better left to grow? What if I'm just broken beyond repair?" "Then you start with the pieces you have and build something new," Felix replied. "You can't change the past, Charles. You can't undo what you did to Amelia, but you can choose who you want to be moving forward. You can choose to learn from this and become a better man, or you can wallow in self-pity until it swallows you whole." Those words stayed with Charles through the surgery and the painful recovery that followed. The operation was successful, and the doctors said that with extensive physical therapy, there was a good chance he would walk again, though he might always need assistance. It was better than the alternative, better than being confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life, but it still felt like a punishment that fit his crimes. During his recovery, Charles had a lot of time to think, and most of those thoughts centered on Amelia and the children. Grace, the nanny, had kept him updated through Felix, telling him that Precious and Junior were doing well, that Amelia had moved them into a nice apartment in Jibagada, and that they talked about their father often despite everything that had happened. "They want to see you," Grace had told Felix during one of her updates. "Precious especially. She's angry with you for what you did to her mother, but she's also worried about you. Children have big hearts like that." The thought of seeing his children filled Charles with both longing and dread. He wanted to hold them, to tell them he was sorry, to try to explain the unexplainable. But he was also terrified that they would look at him the way Amelia had looked at him in the hospital, with pity and finality, like he was someone they used to know but no longer recognized. 3 months after the surgery, Charles was transferred to a rehabilitation center in Abuja, where he could receive intensive physical therapy away from the Lagos life that had destroyed him. The center was peaceful and quiet, surrounded by gardens that bloomed with flowers Charles didn't know the names of, and for the first time in years, he had nothing to do but work on healing his body and confronting the demons that had rotted his soul from the inside out. His physical therapist was a stern woman named Mrs. Adebio who didn't tolerate excuses or self-pity. She pushed Charles harder than anyone had ever pushed him, making him do exercises that left him sweating and cursing and sometimes crying from the pain. But slowly, painfully, his body started to respond. He went from barely being able to move his toes to being able to stand with assistance, and from standing to taking his first shaky steps with the support of parallel bars. "You're doing well," Mrs. Adebio said one afternoon after a particularly grueling session. "Better than I expected, honestly. At this rate, you'll be walking with a cane within 6 months." "What's the point?" Charles asked bitterly, wiping sweat from his forehead with a towel. "What's the point of walking again when I have nowhere to go and no one to walk toward?" Mrs. Adebio fixed him with a look that could cut steel. "The point is that you're alive, Mr. Charles. The point is that you have a chance to rebuild, to become someone your children can be proud of. But if you want to waste that chance feeling sorry for yourself, that's your choice. Just know that every day you spend drowning in regret is a day you're not spending on redemption." Her words hit harder than any of the physical exercises, and Charles found himself thinking about them constantly. Redemption. The word tasted foreign in his mouth, like something he didn't deserve but desperately wanted. He started attending the therapy sessions the center offered, not just physical therapy, but counseling sessions where he had to confront the ugly truth about who he had become and why. His counselor, Dr. Emeka, was a patient man who didn't judge but also didn't let Charles hide from his actions. "You suffered from a disease many successful people suffer from," Dr. Emeka explained during one of their sessions. "You started to believe that your worth was tied to your wealth, that your value as a man was measured by your status, and the woman on your arm rather than the content of your character. And when that belief took root, you became willing to sacrifice everything real for something fake." "How do I fix it?" Charles asked, his voice small and vulnerable. "How do I become someone worth knowing again?" "You start by being honest with yourself," Dr. Emeka said. "You start by admitting that you hurt people, that you destroyed something beautiful because you were too blind to see its value. And then you do the hard work of making amends, not to get those people back, but because it's the right thing to do." Hey fam, compliments of the season to everyone watching. I hope your Christmas has been filled with love, laughter, and all the blessings you deserve. If this story is touching your heart, hitting you in your feelings, or making you think about your own life differently, do me a huge favor and smash that like button. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're tuning in from, and what lesson you're taking away from Amelia and Charles's story. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please join this storytelling family because trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The story you're about to hear will leave you speechless. Now let's get back to Charles and Amelia, because the universe wasn't done teaching lessons, and what was about to happen would change everything in ways no one saw coming. 4 months into his rehabilitation, on a warm Saturday afternoon when the gardens were in full bloom, Felix called Charles with news that made his heart skip several beats. "Amelia and the children are coming to see you tomorrow," Felix said, his voice careful and measured. "She thought it was time, especially since you've been doing so well in therapy. The kids miss you, Charles. Precious has been asking every week when she can visit her father." Charles's hands started shaking so badly that he almost dropped the phone. "Tomorrow, Felix, I don't know if I'm ready. What if they look at me and see nothing but disappointment? What if Precious hates me for what I did to her mother?" "Then you deal with it," Felix said firmly. "You face it head-on like a man instead of running away like a coward. This is your chance, Charles, don't waste it." That night, Charles couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed at the rehabilitation center going over everything he wanted to say, practicing apologies that felt inadequate no matter how he phrased them. He thought about Precious's smile and Junior's laugh, and his chest ached with the realization of how much time he had missed, how many moments he had sacrificed at the altar of his pride. When morning came, Charles asked the staff to help him get ready. He showered carefully, dressed in clean clothes that hung looser on his frame than they used to because the accident and recovery had stripped away the weight that used to pad his body. He positioned himself in the garden where the rehabilitation center allowed patients to receive visitors, choosing a bench near a fountain because the sound of running water helped calm his racing thoughts. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, he saw them walking up the path. Amelia looked radiant in a flowing yellow dress that caught the sunlight and made her look like she was glowing from within. Her natural hair was styled in a beautiful afro that framed her face perfectly, and she walked with a confidence that took Charles's breath away. Beside her was David, tall and handsome in casual clothes, his hand resting protectively on Junior's shoulder. And there, walking slightly ahead of them, was Precious, his 8-year-old daughter who had grown taller and more beautiful in the months since he had seen her. Charles stood up, using his cane for support, and the movement caught Precious's attention. She stopped walking, her eyes widening as she took in her father's appearance. For a moment that felt like an eternity, they just stared at each other across the garden, and Charles held his breath, wondering if she would turn around and walk away. Then Precious ran. She ran across the grass with her braids flying behind her and tears streaming down her face, and she threw herself into Charles's arms so hard that he almost lost his balance. He caught her, his cane clattering to the ground, and held his daughter while she sobbed into his chest. "Daddy," Precious cried, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I missed you so much. I was so scared you were going to leave us forever." "I'm here, baby girl," Charles whispered, his own tears falling into her hair. "I'm here and I'm so sorry. I'm so deeply sorry for everything." Junior, shy at first, slowly approached and wrapped his small arms around Charles's leg, and Charles reached down to pull his son into the embrace. For a few precious minutes, Charles held his children and felt something shift inside his chest, something that felt like hope trying to grow in soil that had been barren for too long. When the children finally pulled away, Charles looked up to see Amelia and David standing a respectful distance away, giving them space for their reunion. David had his arm around Amelia's waist, and she leaned into him with a comfort that spoke of trust and genuine affection. The sight should have destroyed Charles, but instead, it filled him with something unexpected. Gratitude that his children would have a good man in their lives, someone who would show them what love was supposed to look like. "Thank you for bringing them," Charles said to Amelia, his voice thick with emotion. "And thank you for everything else. The surgery, the therapy, the chance to see my children again. I don't deserve any of it." "No, you don't," Amelia said simply, but there was no cruelty in her voice, just honesty. "But I didn't do it for you, Charles. I did it because every child deserves to have their father in their life if possible, and because forgiveness doesn't mean I have to carry bitterness like chains." David stepped forward and extended his hand to Charles, and this time Charles took it. The handshake was firm and genuine, and when David spoke, his words carried a wisdom that Charles wished he had possessed years ago. "Your children are amazing," David said. "Precious is smart as a whip, and Junior has a heart bigger than the sky. They're good kids because they had a mother who loved them enough to protect them from the worst of what happened between you and Amelia. Don't waste this second chance, Charles. Be the father they deserve, even if you can't be the husband Amelia deserved." The words landed with the weight of truth, and Charles nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. They spent an hour in the garden, the children telling Charles about school and friends and the small adventures that made up their daily lives. Amelia and David sat on a nearby bench, giving them space but remaining close enough to supervise, and Charles couldn't help but notice the small things. How David made Amelia laugh, how he listened to her with his full attention, how he touched her hand gently when making a point. This was what love looked like when it was healthy and whole. This was what Charles had thrown away. As the visit drew to a close and the sun started its descent toward the horizon, Precious hugged her father one more time and whispered something in his ear that broke and healed him simultaneously. "I forgive you, Daddy, but please don't hurt Mommy ever again. She's happy now, and she deserves to stay happy." "I won't, sweetheart," Charles promised, kissing the top of her head. "I swear I won't." They left as the evening shadows grew longer, and Charles watched them walk away, a little family unit that he was no longer part of but could at least witness from a distance. He felt Felix's presence beside him before he heard his voice. "How do you feel?" Felix asked quietly. "Like I'm finally starting to understand what I lost," Charles said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And like maybe, just maybe, I can learn to live with that understanding." But as he stood there watching Amelia's yellow dress disappear around the corner, something strange happened. Charles felt a sharp pain shoot through his chest, different from the emotional pain he had grown accustomed to. This was physical, acute, and terrifying. His vision blurred at the edges, and his breathing became labored and shallow. "Felix," Charles gasped, clutching his chest. "Something's wrong, something's really wrong." Felix's face paled with alarm, and he quickly helped Charles sit down on the bench, yelling for help. Medical staff came running from the rehabilitation center, and Charles could hear their voices as if from a great distance. asking him questions he couldn't answer because his lungs felt like they were wrapped in steel bands. Through the chaos and the pain, Charles's mind fixated on one thought, one face, one name. "Amelia," he whispered, reaching out toward the empty path where she had disappeared. "Wait, please wait." But she was already gone, already moving forward with a life that didn't include him. And Charles realized with crystal clarity that he was having some kind of cardiac event brought on by the crushing weight of his regrets. The physical manifestation of a broken heart that had been shattered beyond repair. The medical team rushed him back into the building on a stretcher, his heart monitor beeping frantically, and as Charles felt consciousness starting to slip away, he wondered if this was how it would end, if this was the final payment for his sins. His last coherent thought before the darkness claimed him was a prayer, simple and desperate. "God, if I survive this, let me be worthy of the second chance I've been given. Let me be the man my children can be proud of, even if I can never be the man Amelia deserved." The machines around him screamed their warnings, and medical personnel shouted commands. And somewhere in the distance, Felix was calling Amelia's number, trying to tell her that Charles had collapsed, that the situation was critical, that she needed to come back. But the phone just rang and rang and rang, because Amelia was in the car with David and the children, laughing at something Junior had said, living her life in the present instead of being chained to a past that had almost destroyed her. And Charles, lying on that stretcher with his heart struggling to keep beating, realized that perhaps this was the ultimate lesson, that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt, and that the price of taking love for granted might be higher than anyone could ever imagine paying. The heart monitor's beeping became erratic, then started to slow. And the last thing Charles saw before everything went black was the fluorescent lights of the rehabilitation center's ceiling, cold and clinical, and nothing like the warm yellow of Amelia's dress as she walked away into her new life, leaving him behind in the wreckage of the old one. Whether his heart would keep beating, whether he would wake up to face another day of rehabilitation and regret, whether he would ever see his children again, or watch Amelia marry the man who knew how to treasure her. These questions hung in the air unanswered as the medical team worked frantically to save a life that its owner had almost destroyed through his own choices. And in that moment of uncertainty, suspended between life and whatever came after, Charles finally understood what Amelia had tried to tell him all along. That love wasn't about possession or image or status. It was about seeing someone's soul and choosing to honor it every single day. And that failure to do so didn't just break hearts. It broke futures, broke families, broke the very foundation of everything worth having in this world. But understanding came too late, as it so often does. And the question of whether Charles would survive to apply that understanding remained hanging in the balance, unanswered and uncertain, as the screen faded to black. My people, that's where we have to stop for now. I know, you're probably screaming at your screen right now wanting to know what happens next. Does Charles survive? Will Amelia find out about his collapse? What will happen to Precious and Junior? And what about David and Amelia's future together? These questions and so many more will be answered, but you'll have to wait for the next season to find out. If this story touched you, if it made you feel something deep in your soul, please hit that like button and drop a comment. Tell me what you thought about Amelia's journey, about Charles's downfall, about the lessons this story taught you. Where are you watching from? What part hit you the hardest? I want to hear from you because your engagement keeps this channel alive and helps me bring you more powerful stories like this one. And listen, if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This is just the beginning. There are so many more stories to tell, so many more journeys to take together. Hit that subscribe button and join this beautiful community of storytellers and story lovers. Happy Christmas to you and yours once again. May this season bring you peace, joy, and the wisdom to treasure the people who treasure you. Until next time, keep loving hard, keep growing, and remember, the way you treat people when you have nothing says everything about who you really are. Stay blessed, fam.